Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Sara Saleh, and it is a huge privilege to be here facilitating tonight's proceedings. We're going to get right into it, get this show on the road. Before we begin, I'd like to invite Laura Murphy-Oates to deliver the acknowledgement of country and to say a few words. Laura is a Waialawan woman based on Gadigal, a broadcast journalist with NITV, SBS, and Guardian Australia, and an Atlantic Fellow for Social Equity. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend and journalist, Laura Murphy-Oates.
Thank you, Sara. I'm not working at all of those media organisations currently, just to be clear. I've worked at them in the past. Yes, my name's Laura Murphy-Oates. I'm here to acknowledge country, and I do so with the blessing of some of our local Gadigal elders here. We're meeting tonight on sovereign, unceded Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to the Gadigal people who have cared for this land since time immemorial, and also all the mob in these surrounding areas, the Bidjigal, the Wongal, the Camaragal, the Darug, the Barramanigal. This is the site of first contact. So these mob were some of our earliest freedom fighters fighting invasion and occupation. And as a Waialawan woman, my country is out on western New South Wales. I grew up on Darkinjung and Guringai country, just north of Sydney. So I'm a visitor here, as many of you would be as well. And I've worked and lived here for about 15 years now, a lot of that time as a journalist in all of those various newsrooms. And over that time speaking to mob, you learn a bit about some of the stories of resistance and some of the really rich history of Black media of this area, really in the immediate surrounds of where we are right now. So I wanted to share a tiny bit about that with you tonight. So just up the road from here, the country's first politically organised United Aboriginal Activist Group held its first conference in 1925. They were called the Australian Aboriginal Progressive Association, or the AAPA, and they met in St David's Church and Hall in Surrey Hills. There were more than 200 people in attendance, and one of the founders of the association, Fred Maynard, and other members of the community made speeches calling for Aboriginal self-determination and equality. The group was standing against the New South Wales Aborigines Protection Board, which governed the lives of Aboriginal people at the time, including my family members and my grandmother. They oversaw a policy of apartheid and segregation, essentially. And the AAPA was calling for its abolition and demanded that Black affairs be managed by Black people. They held events around the state after this first Sydney event down the road, and hundreds of mob rocked up, apparently, more than 700 mob in Kempsey. But after a smear campaign by the government, as well as increased police intimidation of the AAPA members, which included threats to jail them and to take away their children, the group kind of ceased that public campaign. It's worth mentioning that Fred Maynard was an early prominent Black writer, and his letters and opinion pieces were published in a Newcastle newspaper. So it's due to the writings of his descendant, John Maynard, that I kind of learned some of this history about one of these early Black writers and journalists. Not too long after that, in the 1930s, a new coalition of Aboriginal rights groups kind of sprung up in the city, including the similarly named Aborigines Progressive Association, which was launched in 1937 by William Ferguson and Jack Patton. And they began organising a day of mourning protest, set for January 26, 1938, to mark 150 years of colonial invasion and occupation. And they marched in silent protest from Town Hall in the city to Elizabeth Street, just a few blocks from here. So members of this group would go on to publish one of the earliest Aboriginal newspapers in the country and establish themselves as the first Black journalists, essentially, or some of the first Black journalists. And to publicise this day of mourning protest, they wrote a pamphlet, and I just want to read a short extract from that pamphlet. It states, "You are the new Australians, but we are the old Australians. We have in our arteries the blood of the original Australians who have lived in this land for many thousands of years. You came here only recently, and you took our land away from us by force. You have almost exterminated our people, but there are enough of us remaining to expose the humbug of your claim as white Australians to be civilised, progressive and kindly and humane nation. Reading that, I thought of Palestine, and I can't help but think of Palestine in this moment. And I think similar truths are being spoken daily by Palestinian journalists right now about living under occupation and surviving a genocide. I think that speaks to the shared nature of our struggle and why so many black fellows are standing with Palestine, because we know what it is to live through a genocide and live through occupation. As a journalist myself and as a union member, I stand with my colleagues here in so-called Australia who have been silent while trying to report on Palestine, and I've seen that myself. Most importantly, I stand with Palestinian journalists. Their bravery and commitment to reporting on the genocide of their own people, families and communities is nothing but humbling. I mourn for the Palestinian journalists killed by Israel and the IDF, which, according to the UN numbers, are at least 250 since 2023. It is in honour of them that we are here tonight to hear from renowned journalist Chris Hedges and the wonderful Sara, speaking about the betrayal of Palestinian journalists. Thank you.
Sorry, I have the word. Thank you so much, Laura, for your important reflections and your labor. And there's so much power and dignity is undeniable in your words. And I'm infinitely grateful to be learning from you and so many others in the struggle. And I really do want to echo your sentiments as a Palestinian in particular. In a time of great despair, I have drawn a lot of strength, so much strength from the struggle for justice here in this colony. And I try every day, sometimes not so well, but every day I'm trying to tread with deep care and respect on these lands. And I understand deeply that no one is free until we're all free. And I hope that everybody in the room will take a moment to reflect on that and what it means for them and looks like to them in their daily life. Tonight, we are joined by Chris Hedges. Chris is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who was a foreign correspondent for 15 years for the New York Times, where he served as the Middle East Bureau Chief and Balkan Bureau Chief for the paper. He previously worked overseas for the Dallas Morning News, the Christian Science Monitor, and NPR. He is the host of the show, The Chris Hedges Report, which many of you would be familiar with as well. We have the deep privilege of hearing the speech that the National Press Club of Australia refused to let Chris deliver. Yeah, I want to hear that. I was so looking forward to that part. Absolute shame, travesty. Chris was due to speak there on the silencing of Palestinian journalists. The event was confirmed, promoted, and then abruptly cancelled, not without, of course, a side serving of gaslighting, institutional gaslighting, which we're also very accustomed to here in this media and political landscape. And it's all rather ironic, of course, absurd, shocking, but unsurprising to us who have been here as part of the movement. So tonight, Chris delivers that very address, uncensored, unfiltered, and exactly as it was meant to be heard. And we're very privileged to also be having time for a short Q&A afterwards. Please join me in welcoming Chris Hedges. Come down. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Australia produces some of the greatest journalists of our era, Julian Assange, John Pilger, but let's be honest, they also produce some of the worst, including the last half hour I just spent being lynched by David Muir on ABC.
Shame. Boo.
It was quite a little performance. You can hear it tonight. Listen to it and write ABC. It was appalling. But before I begin, I just want to let you know that this talk is not sponsored by Raytheon TAA Systems and Thales, which sell weapons to Israel to sustain the genocide. It is not sponsored by Amazon Web Services, which provides cloud infrastructure to Israeli defense and intelligence agencies, Deloitte, or MasterCard, which also do business with the apartheid state of Israel. And this is how you know we are not at the National Press Club of Australia.
Ooh.
There are two types of war correspondents. The first type does not attend press conferences. They do not beg generals and politicians for interviews. They take risks from combat zones. They send back to their viewers or readers what they see, which is almost always diametrically opposed to official narratives. This first type, in every war, is a tiny minority. Then there is the second type, the inchoate blob of self-identified war correspondents who play at war. Despite what they tell editors and the public, they have no intention of putting themselves in danger. They are pleased with the Israeli ban on foreign reporters into Gaza. They plead with officials for background briefings and press conferences. They collaborate with their government minders who impose restrictions and rules that keep them out of combat. They slavishly disseminate whatever they are fed by officials, much of which is a lie, and pretend it is news. They join little jaunts arranged by the military dog and pony shows where they get to dress up and play soldier and visit outposts where everything is controlled and choreographed. The mortal enemy of these poseurs are the real war reporters, in this case, Palestinian journalists in Gaza. These reporters expose them as toadies and sycophants, discrediting nearly everything they disseminate. For this reason, the poseurs never pass up a chance to question the veracity and motives of those in the field. I watch these snakes do this repeatedly to my colleagues Robert Fisk and John Pilger, and this is of course what I experienced a few moments ago. When war reporter Ben Anderson arrived at the hotel where journalists covering the war in Liberia were encamped, in his words, getting drunk at bars on expenses, having affairs, and exchanging information rather than actually going out and getting information, his image of war reporters took a huge hit. I thought, finally, I'm amongst my heroes, Anderson told me. This is where I've wanted to be for years. And then me and the cameraman I was with, who knew the rebels very well. He took us out for about 3 weeks with the rebels. We came back to Monrovia. The guys in the hotel bar said, "Where have you been? We thought you'd gone home." We said, "We went out to cover the war. Isn't that our job? Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" The romantic view I had of foreign correspondents was suddenly destroyed. In Liberia, he went on, I thought actually a lot of these guys are full of shit. They're not even willing to leave the hotel, let alone leave the safety of the capital and actually do some reporting. The dividing line, which occurred in every war I covered, defines the reporting on the genocide in Gaza. It is not a divide of professionalism or culture. Palestinian reporters expose Israeli atrocities and implode Israeli lies. The rest of the press does not. Palestinian journalists targeted and assassinated by Israel pay as many great war correspondents do with their lives, although in far greater numbers. Israel has murdered 245 journalists in Gaza by one count, and more than 273 by another. The goal is to shroud the genocide in darkness. No war I covered comes close to these numbers of dead. Since October 7th, Israel has killed more journalists than the US Civil War, World Wars I and II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, including the conflicts in Cambodia and Laos, the wars in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and the post-9/11 war in Afghanistan combined, according to an April 2025 study by Brown University. Journalists in Palestine leave wills and record videos to be read or played at their death. On a sweltering afternoon a few weeks ago, I was in the office of the head of Palestinian TV in Cairo, talking with Salman al-Bashir, who was the network's correspondent in Gaza. On the evening of November 2nd, 2023, Salman was scheduled for the evening broadcast. It was, he tells me ruefully, the 106th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which in 1917 committed the British government to establishing, quote, a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Palestine TV reporter Mohammed Abu Hattab was concluding his 6-hour shift at 7 p.m. on the grounds of Nasser Hospital in Han Yunis. After reporting on the ongoing bombings and destruction, he handed broadcasting over to Salman. Abu Hattab, whose apartment was next to the hospital, went home. Most of the other journalists, because traveling any distance in Gaza was dangerous, slept in tents on the hospital grounds. There was an explosion near the hospital, Salman says on a video he shows me of his broadcast. We can hear an explosion that is very loud. Television presenter Duha Shami in Ramallah says to Salman, it sounds close. Yes, Salman says on air. There has been an explosion. I see the ambulances. I will let you know when we have any news. A member of the emergency team at the hospital runs towards Salman shouting, Mohammed Abu Hattab, Mohammed Abu Hattab, your friend, your colleague, has been martyred. They targeted the house of Abu Hattab. Salman stops, he looks into the camera and says, the target was apparently the house of Mohammed Abu Hattab's family. A lot of people have been killed. Mohammed Abu Hattab was apparently martyred. Salman stands in front of the camera wearing a blue flak jacket with the word press emblazoned on it. He is wearing a blue helmet and holds a microphone. There is no international protection at all and no immunity, he says to the camera tearfully, as the red lights of an ambulance flash behind him. These flak jackets and helmets do not protect us. They are just slogans that we wear. They do not protect journalists at all. Here we are victims losing our lives one after the other at no cost, he says, as he removes the chin strap of his helmet and takes the helmet off. We are waiting for our turn, one after another. He undoes his flak jacket, lets it drop to the ground. We can't take it anymore, he says emotionally on the camera. We're exhausted. Here we become martyrs. It is only a matter of time. No one sees us or the size of the catastrophe. No one sees the crime we are experiencing in Gaza. Psychologically, I couldn't accept it, someone told me in Cairo. I was with him 20 minutes earlier. Now he was dead. They brought his body to the hospital. I refused to look at him. The people who saw him told me half of his face had blown away. In the video, he turns away from the camera and sobs. Duha, in Ramallah, folds her head into her hands and wipes away tears. We are victims on live television, he says in the broadcast. Mohammed Abu Hattab was here half an hour ago. He left us, along with his wife, his son, his brother, and other members of his family. Salman shows me a video of Mohammed's funeral. He is one of the pallbearers. Mohammed's body is wrapped in a white shroud. His blue flak jacket and a microphone lie on top of his body, along with a small Palestinian flag. There is no God but God, the crowd chants. The martyrs are God's beloved. Salman then shows us a video of the gutted remains of Mohammed's apartment where he and 10 family members were killed. Did you do anything differently after Mohammed was killed, I asked. I was very cautious, Salman answered. How, I asked. With my language, he said. I started speaking very professionally. I talked about the war and the details of a war without using words other journalists were using. I tried not to aggravate the Israelis. I no longer referred to them as Zionists or the new Nazis. I stopped using words like messianic. I stopped calling them the Israeli Occupation Army. I called them the Israeli Army. Salman continued his work until his friend, the Al Jazeera cameraman Samer Abu Daqqa, who had Belgian citizenship, was killed on December 15, 2023, in a drone strike. Samir had sent his family, including 4 children, to Belgium, but he refused to leave Gaza. He and Wael al-Duda, Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, had been covering the aftermath of an Israeli strike that killed at least 20 people at Haifa school in Han Yunis, which was being used as a shelter for displaced families. Wael was wounded in his hand and stomach, but managed to escape. The Israeli soldiers and hovering drones fired on ambulances and medics attempting to reach Samir. 3 rescue workers were killed. Samir, who was 45, bled to death over 5 hours. I was with Samir on the day before he was martyred, Salman said softly. That was it. I couldn't continue. I had to leave Gaza. In August 2025, when Middle East journalist Mohammed Salama and Ahmed Abu Aziz, Reuters photojournalist Hussam al-Masri, and freelancers Moaz Abu Taha and Mariam Daga, who had worked with several media outlets, including the Associated Press, were killed, along with 15 others at Nasser Hospital in a double tap strike designed to kill first responders following the initial strike. How did Western news agencies respond? Israeli military says strikes on Gaza hospital targeted what it says was a Hamas camera, the Associated Press reported. IDF claims hospital strike was aimed at Hamas camera, announced CNN. Israeli army says 6 terrorists killed in Monday's strike on Gaza hospital, the AFP headline read. Initial inquiry says Hamas camera was target of Israeli strike that killed journalists, Reuters reported. Israel claims troops saw Hamas camera before deadly hospital attack, Sky News explained. For the record, the camera belonged to Reuters. The news agency said Israel was fully aware they were filming from the hospital. Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif, one of the most popular journalists in Gaza, who reported daily on the genocide, received death threats on his phone. In November 2023, the Israeli military ordered Anas to cease reporting and leave northern Gaza. They sent him messages informing him that he was being tracked. His family home was bombed, killing his father. The Israeli military's Arabic spokesman accused him of terrorism and being a Hamas operative overseeing the launching of rockets into Israel. The Committee to Protect Journalists called the sustained attacks on Anas a precursor to assassination. The Tel Aviv-based magazine Plus 972 reported that the Israeli military has a special unit called the Legitimization Cell, which carries out campaigns to portray Palestinian journalists as Hamas operatives in an effort to justify their assassination. In October 2024, Anas was with a group of journalists who were fired upon by Israeli soldiers in Jabalia. Cameraman Fadi al-Wahidi, clearly marked as a journalist in his flak jacket, was shot in the neck and paralyzed. Soon after, the Israeli military accused 6 journalists, including Anas, of being militants. His Instagram account was taken down. On May 2nd, 2025, after Israel blocked food and humanitarian aid, Anas reported on the mounting malnutrition and starvation in Gaza. In July, he posted on social media that he is drowning in hunger and called the starvation a slow death. In one broadcast, he choked back tears as a malnourished woman behind him fainted. A bystander shouted, "Keep going, Anas. You are our voice." On August 10th, 2025, Anas and 3 other journalists were killed by an Israeli drone while in their media tent outside Al-Shifa Hospital. How was the killing of these journalists reported by their colleagues in the Western press? Israel kills Al Jazeera journalist it says was Hamas leader, reported Reuters titled its story, despite the fact that Anas was part of a Reuters team that had won a 2024 Pulitzer Prize. German newspaper Bild published a front-page story headlined, "Terrorist disguised as a journalist killed in Gaza." The colleagues of these Palestinian journalists in the Western press broadcast from the border fence with Gaza, decked out in flak jackets and helmets, where they have as much chance of being hit by shrapnel or a bullet as being struck by an asteroid. They scurry like lemmings to briefings by Israeli officials. They are not only the enemies of truth, but also the enemies of journalists doing the real work of war reporting. This divide is one I experienced in all the wars I covered. When Iraqi troops attacked the Saudi border town of Hafji during the First Gulf War, Saudi soldiers fled in panic. 2 French photographers and I watched frantic soldiers commandeering fire trucks and racing south. U.S. Marines pushed the Iraqis back. But in Riyadh, the press was told of our gallant Saudi allies defending their homeland. Once fighting ended, the press bus stopped a few miles down the road from Hafji. The pool reporters clambered out, escorted by military minders. They did stand-ups with the distant sound of artillery and smoke as a backdrop, and repeated the lies the Pentagon wanted told. Meanwhile, the 2 photographers and I were detained as we left Hafji and beaten by enraged Saudi military police, furious that we had documented the panicked flight of Saudi soldiers. My refusal to abide by press restrictions in the First Gulf War saw the other New York Times reporters in Saudi Arabia write a letter to the foreign editor saying I was ruining the paper's relationship with the military. If not for the intervention of R.W. Johnny Apple, who had covered Vietnam, I would have been sent back to New York. I do not fault anyone for not wanting to go into a war zone. This is a sign of normality. It is rational. It is understandable. Those of us who volunteer to go into combat, my colleague Clyde Haberman at the New York Times once said that I would parachute into any war with or without a parachute, have obvious personality defects. But I fault those who pretend to be war correspondents. They do tremendous damage. They peddle false narratives. They mask reality. They serve as witting or unwitting propagandists. They discredit the voices of the victims and exonerate the killers. They betray those who take great risks to report the truth. When I covered the war in El Salvador before I worked for the New York Times, the paper's correspondent dutifully regurgitated whatever the embassy fed her. This had the effect of making my editors, as well as the editors of other correspondents who did report the war, question our veracity and quote-unquote impartiality. It made it harder for readers to understand what was happening. The false narrative neutered and often overpowered the real one. The slander used to discredit my Palestinian colleagues, claiming they are members of Hamas, is sadly familiar. Many Palestinian reporters I know in Gaza are in fact quite critical of Hamas. But even if they have ties to Hamas, so what? Israel's attempt to justify targeting journalists from the Hamas-run Al-Aqsa media network is also a violation of Article 79 of the Geneva Convention. I worked with reporters and photographers who had a wide variety of beliefs, including Marxist-Leninists in Central America. This did not prevent them from being honest. I was in Bosnia and Kosovo with a Spanish cameraman, Miguel Gil Moreno, who was later killed with my friend Kurt Schork. Miguel was a member of the right-wing Catholic group Opus Dei. He was also a journalist of tremendous courage, great compassion, and moral probity, despite, for what I found, his rather bizarre opinions about Francisco Franco. But he did not lie. In every war I covered, I was attacked as supporting or belonging to whatever group the government, including the US government, was seeking to crush. I was accused of being a tool of the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front in El Salvador, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, the Guatemalan National Revolutionary Unity Party, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, Hamas, the Muslim-led government in Bosnia, and the Kosovo Liberation Army. John Simpson of the BBC, like many Western reporters, argues, I'm quoting, that the world needs honest, unbiased eyewitness reporting to help people make up their minds about the major issues of our time. This has so far been impossible in Gaza. The assumption that if Western reporters were in Gaza, the coverage would improve is risible. Trust me, it would not. Israel bans the foreign press because there is a bias in Europe and the United States in favor of reporting by Western reporters. Israel is aware that the scale of the genocide is too vast for Western outlets to hide or obscure, despite all the ink and airtime they give to Israeli and US apologists. Israel also cannot continue its systematic campaign of annihilation of journalists in Gaza if it has to contend with foreign media in its midst. Israeli lies amplified by Western media outlets, including my former employer, the New York Times, are worthy of Pravda. Beheaded babies, babies cooked in ovens, mass rape by Hamas, errant Palestinian rockets that cause explosions at hospitals and massacre civilians, secret command tunnels and command centers in schools and hospitals, journalists who direct Hamas rockets, and protesters of the genocide on college campuses who are anti-Semites and supporters of Hamas. I covered the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis much of that time in Gaza for 7 years. If there was one indisputable fact, it is that Israel lies like it breathes. The decision by Western reporters to give credibility to these lies, to give them the same weight as documented Israeli atrocities, is a cynical game. The reporters know these lies are lies, but they and the news outlets that employ them prize access, in this case, access to Israeli and US officials, above truth. The reporters, as well as their editors and publishers, fear becoming targets of Israel and the powerful Israel lobby. There is no cost for betraying Palestinians. They are powerless. Call those lies out, and you will swiftly find your requests for briefings and interviews with officials rebuffed. You won't be invited by press officers to participate in staged visits to Israeli military units. You and your news organization will be viciously attacked. You will be left out in the cold. Your editors will terminate your assignment and maybe your employment. Your talks will be canceled at press clubs, and this is not good for careers. And so the lies are dutifully repeated, no matter how absurd. It is pathetic watching these reporters and their news outlets, as Robert Fisk writes, fight like tigers to join these pools in which they would be censored, restrained, and deprived of all freedom of movement on the battlefield. The barrage of Israeli lies, amplified and given credibility by the Western press, violates a fundamental tenet of journalism: the duty to transmit the truth to the viewer or reader. It legitimizes mass slaughter. It refuses to hold Israel to account. It betrays Palestinian journalists, those reporting and being killed in Gaza, and it exposes the bankruptcy of Western journalists whose primary attributes are careerism and cowardice. Thank you.
Wow, is it any wonder they wanted to silence you? I'm frankly speechless. Chris, you disrupt their false narrative. You do not afford Israel the impunity that everybody else does for its vicious crimes and brutality and violence. You cannot be bought. They spend billions in propaganda and PR campaigns, and we break it for free. They lie, they bribe, they rewrite, they erase, they harass, they target, they vilify, they punish, they murder, and yet they are still losing. They're still losing. Make no mistake, they are still losing. And one of the reasons that is because we have journalists with integrity. Journalists like you, Chris. Journalists who report the truth no matter what the cost. And for all your other self-reported personality defects, that is certainly not one of them. So, we're going to open up for questions now, but because I have the mic, I'm going to start. And then we will move to guests and have a few from the audience as well. It's been a really challenging time right now. There's a lot of lack of clarity and uncertainty, and I wanted your view on what you think lies ahead for Palestinians in Gaza following the ceasefire announcements, and why, do we have to keep exposing the truth in the meantime, given the context?
Well, this 20-point peace plan is a joke. It's not designed to bring peace or recognize the rights of Palestinians. It was designed to release the Israeli hostages. Israel immediately began violating it. I think up to 40 people have been killed. They reduced aid immediately. They were supposed to send 600 trucks a day, yes. And then they just stopped aid. I mean, so we know where it's going. That big Israeli newspaper that was founded by Sheldon Adelson in an editorial told its readers, don't worry, that it's just rhetoric. Trump has green-lighted the resumption of hostilities if Hamas, quote unquote, doesn't abide by the ceasefire agreement. Well, who is it, according to the agreement, who judges whether Hamas abides by it? It's Israel. So I think those of us who follow Gaza closely are hoping that the last ceasefire lasted 2 months. But this is not designed, nor was it ever designed, to bring about an equitable peace. Israel's intent, Israeli goals remain the same. That is the complete depopulation of Gaza. There is no clean water. You have to remember the living conditions. 500,000 Palestinians are malnourished. Famine still remains a serious problem. They're drinking fetid water. There's no place to live. It's also winter. It actually gets quite cold in Gaza. Respiratory diseases are rampant along with other infectious diseases. And Israel, the one impediment to Israel's objective is that they have not yet found a place that they can force the Palestinians into. They've been negotiating, of course, heavy pressure on Egypt. Well, originally when Blinken made his first trip in the Middle East, he walked around and proposed quotas to the Egyptian government, to King Abdullah in Jordan, which were rejected. Then there's been negotiations with Somalia, Sudan, and Somaliland. The only way to stop the genocide, which is not over, of course, is one, the U.S. cuts arms shipments. 68% of munitions now Israel ran through its stockpiles a long time ago. Or the second is outside intervention, a naval breaking the blockade through naval vessels and putting a no-fly zone over Gaza. This is what happened. I covered northern Iraq when Saddam was pushing the Kurds up into the mountain passes, and NATO imposed a no-fly zone and it forced Iraqi forces below the 38th parallel. So there's actually a precedent for it. So those are the only two ways that I see stopping this genocidal project. Remember, Israel now is very close to achieving what it is, and this is within the DNA of the Zionist project, has long wanted to achieve, and we can't divorce from what's happening in the West Bank from what's happening in Gaza. Since October 7th, Israel has handed out over 10,000 automatic weapons to Jewish colonists who form these rogue death squads that are terrorizing and killing Palestinians, and they have seized, especially in the Jordan Valley, vast tracts of land, so that they now control 80% of the West Bank. And as soon as they finish with Gaza, they intend to turn on the West Bank because they are able to do this with impunity. This, like Keir Starmer, declaring a Palestinian state while they only suspend 10% of the weapons shipments to Israel. It's kabuki theater. It's a way to do nothing, to say they're doing something when they're doing nothing.
Oh, so that sounds familiar. Our government recognized Palestine incidentally, whilst also being complicit in and continuing an arms relationship with Israel, and that's certainly something for us to be able to do, is to pressure, put sanctions and pressure so that arms trade ends. To go back to the 20-point peace plan, one of the points was for Hamas to, of course, be disarmed. And I'm interested in your view as to why that is the case, why many leaders will call for Hamas to be disarmed, despite it being, for better or worse, one of the only things, if not the only thing, between Israel and the complete annihilation of the people of Gaza, to disarm Hamas, but not for Israel to demilitarize.
Well, under international law, the Palestinian people have a right to resist, including the use of violence. That they have every right to resist. And this is the bizarre phenomenon that we're in, where the perpetrators of the genocide are issuing demands on the people who are being slaughtered. It makes no sense. Hamas isn't going to disarm. I mean, this is, that is insanity. And they know that. I mean, that's one of the caveats that was built into the plan, because Israel will decide whether it's true or false that they haven't disarmed, and that becomes a green light for resuming the genocidal campaign. But that's just part of the whole ridiculous nature of this plan, because it imposes conditions on the victims, not the oppressor.
I want to open up the floor to some questions now. If I can just have the roving mic, and we'll start with Ahmed Abadli from the Palestine Justice Movement, Sydney.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you very much, Chris, for the brilliant speech. My question is, being always viewed through, fundamentalist and authoritarian lenses in the West, but also largely due to it being, proscribed as a terrorist organization, has the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, ever made any effort in changing this public perception in the West, whether through media or political engagement? And also, just to add to that question, from your personal interaction with the leadership of the movement, do you agree with the Western perception, with that Western perception?
No, I mean, I knew quite well one of the co-founders of Hamas, Dr. Abdel Aziz Rantisi, and then after he was assassinated with his son in 2004, Nizar Rayan. It's a national liberation movement. That's how, when it was founded, that's what it was founded as. It was open to all Palestinians, regardless of their particular religious orientation. This gets in, and first of all, the problem is that those of us who attempt to speak a truth in the face of this Western narrative, and this is exactly what happened to me at ABC, the goal is to destroy our credibility the way the credibility of Palestinians has been destroyed. Has Hamas carried out acts of terrorism? Yes, certainly, and they did on October 7th. But every resistance movement, I'm not defending it. To understand, is not to condone. But every resistance movement, including the Jewish and Zionist underground movements pre-1948, carried out acts of terrorism. Why? Because they don't have an army, they don't have a mechanized unit, they don't have an air force, they don't have a navy, they don't have command and control, and so they respond with acts of terror against state terror. But the fact is that part of the way that the conflict is obscured is this creation of a kind of equilibrium, as if Hamas is an existential threat to Israel, which has the fourth largest army in the world. It's absurd. And I would encourage you to look at the C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins, a brilliant book about the Haitian slave uprising and independence movement. And he talks about the momentary passions because when enslaved people on Saint-Domingue rose up against the French planter class, they reacted the way Hamas reacted on October 7th after being trapped inside an open-air prison for 16 years. They reacted the way Nat Turner did when Nat Turner led the slave rebellion in the South. They killed every white they saw. They reacted the way Jewish inmates did when they carried out an uprising in Sobibor, where they were stabbing Germans going, "This is for my mother, this is for my sister." Now, I've covered war. This is just part of human reality. It's not good or bad. But Hamas is not a terrorist organization. I covered the bus bombings in Jerusalem and was quite opposed to them, and I would argue with Rantisi about it. And my argument was, you have the moral high ground and you're squandering it. These were just indiscriminate bombings on public buses. And his argument was, and which was correct, he said, look at the numbers of Palestinian children they have killed. I mean, there's no comparison. It's in the hundreds. And he said, when they stop killing our children, we'll stop killing their children. It's not an argument I bought in the end. But it's not just Hamas that's been demonized, but Muslims have been demonized. The things that are acceptable that we can say in mainstream discourse about Muslims are so patently racist. And yet, especially since 9/11 in the United States, they've just become part of common discourse. And that is just one of the battles someone such as myself, who spent 7 years in the Middle East, fight vainly. It's because it's just become part of the common vernacular.
And I think anyone who has reported on this and started their reporting on October 7 or has reported on October 7 as divorced from, the reality as though it exists in vacuum, I would say that is a choice, and that is deeply disingenuous, particularly in our media landscape. And then I think we have, I'm sure you would have noticed, a very, disproportionate reporting on, I mean, here and really in Western media broadly, very disproportionate reporting on what's going on. Journalists barely get a headline.
Well, this was the point I was trying to make this evening. What the hell is this show called? Late Night with,
Yeah.
what's his
Name
name?
and shame.
Huh?
Late Night Live with David
Late
Marr.
Night Live.
Yes.
It's
The
not,
ABC.
it's not actually live, by the way, because I just recorded it. But this is the kind of brick wall you run into. And, you know.
This is our most responsible.
Is he?
relative. This is supposedly.
Oh, really?
supposedly.
He's a real
Public
piece of shit.
broadcaster. Yeah.
And
Well-
by the way, that's what I told him when I left.
Well, I have a few favorite journalists in the audience here tonight that I'm very happy to see, and who I also want to acknowledge because of their, their being, unequivocal in speaking truth to power and paying it at a high price for that. And I think it's worth mentioning, given the conversation we're having tonight. One of them also is someone who has been staunch, and I think Peter's somewhere in the room. Peter Canal? Thank you.
My question is, in this new world where there are few, if any, consequences when countries are indiscriminately bombed and when tens of thousands of people are slaughtered before our eyes, what can ethical journalists do to resist the invigorated censorship and biases both within and outside of mainstream?
Well, one, relentlessly hold up the voices of the victims. That's all I've done, is kind of all genocide all the time since October 7th. That's first and foremost. And call out, as I did tonight, the complicity of our colleagues who essentially lend themselves to the genocidal project. And of course, they will seek to marginalize our voices and shut us down. But what we have and what they don't is the truth. And I covered the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia. I was in the Magic Lantern Theater every night with Václav Havel. Havel had been at it from 1977, starting with Charter 77, all the way up to 1989. Time in prison, he was a non-person. And I, of course, like others in this room, fought for 14 years on behalf of Julian Assange on my own money. I flew to cover his court cases in London because I knew I was seated next to the Guardian correspondent. Didn't have a clue as to what was going on, which is probably why the Guardian sent him. So myself, Craig Murray, and a few others, we just did the work we're supposed to do. And I have to say that Julian is free because of you, because of Australia, finally, the people who stood up for the most important journalists of our era. We just have to do our job, and it's, it does feel often like we're just running into a brick wall. And of course, all of these, I worked for the New York Times. It's an institution filled with careerists. I'm sure the people who run ABC and the press club will love this broadcast tonight. And what's his name? Dave? Right. I'm trying to forget it. So they'll love it, and they'll tell him what a great when I walked out the room, I said, "You're not a journalist. You sit in booths like this. You've never been where I've been. You've never done what I did." Ever. So we just have to do our job, and can be, let's be honest, it can be frustrating and difficult. And if we look at what they did to Julian, he was crucified. Just horrific, kept in the high security prison for 5 years, and he hadn't even been charged with a crime. I sat through those court cases. It was, Dickensian. It was something out of the Lubyanka. And that was my job, and there was just a handful of us who just relentlessly did it. It was our job to expose the farce, the judicial farce that it was. And that's all we can do. I mean, there's a wonderful Anna Akhmatova, the great Russian poet. Her son was thrown in the Lubyanka, or maybe it was the prison in Leningrad, I can't remember, but anyway, by Stalin. And so she was standing in line every day with all the other mothers that were visiting their husbands or their sons or whatever. And in her book of poems, Requiem, she begins it with this passage, and this beaten down woman in front of her turns around and she said, "Can you describe this?" And she says, "Yes." And she said, a slight smile. It's our job to make sure that those who are peddling this false narrative are countered with the true narrative. And I'm not Pollyannish. It doesn't always win. It doesn't. But without us, there's no chance that it will win.
And just quickly want to thank you again for that question, Peter. And for those who don't follow Peter Knoll and his work at Declassified Australia, please do. It's really doing really important work. We got to support local journalists as well, who, as we know, have been at the forefront and again really experiencing a level of violence and punishment that, yes, is certainly staggering. Next question, we're going to go to Claudia Taranto from Penn Sydney. Hello.
Thank you also for a searing speech and for documenting those cases of journalists who've been targeted. You mentioned Anna Akhmatova, a great poet, and there are also many great Palestinian poets and writers. What sense do you have of the impact of the genocide on writers? Have they been targeted in the same way that journalists have? Powerful poems emerged at the beginning of the genocide, but how does one write in the circumstances, the humanitarian disaster that's unfolding?
Yes, they have clearly been targeted. The entire intellectual class, this is just what happens in all genocides, has been targeted. So doctors, journalists, professors, writers, it's physicists. Israel, because of its monitoring systems, it knows who it wants to kill. And I am writing a book with the cartoonist Joe Sacco. I hope you all know his great work. Yeah. Footnotes in Gaza and Palestine. We were in Egypt this spring, interviewing 29 families who came from Gaza, and we are writing a book called Requiem for Gaza. And it's interesting that several of those, some of them were journalists. Well, I mentioned Summer, who we saw in Cairo, but it's just incontrovertible that they're targeted because, like Mohammed Abu Hatib, they're not even 5 minutes in their apartment. Or in the case of medical staff, Israel knew the buses that were carrying medical staff to the hospitals and would blow them up. Doctors were being killed on their way to their shift or home from their shift. So Israel has carried out a systematic, targeted campaign to destroy not just civil society, but all of those within that society, all of those leaders, writers, to essentially reduce. That's part of reducing Gaza to a kind of inchoate, ungovernable, unmanageable mob, which is the goal. So yeah, there's no question they've been systematically targeted, and that is, along Gaza. I mean, this is just for someone who lived in Gaza. Gaza is one of the oldest cities on earth, and so these mosques that I used to go into, these amazing, this Roman port, it's all gone. It's a kind of culture side, if you can use that word. It's which is also part of genocide. So every aspect that makes life sustainable, that nurtures life, is destroyed, and that's the point. And that's why Israel is never going to. I mean, this idea that Israel will allow it to be rebuilt. I mean, their vision of rebuilding it is turning it into, a paradise for Jewish colonists and people who want to stay in, the Trump Hotel. When they took back the Golan Heights, they actually built a Trump Tower, but it's a really ugly, concrete, boxy. That's one of the real. I mean, there are many, many, many crimes in Gaza, but that's because Gaza has the highest literacy rate probably of anywhere on earth. It's like 99%, and they produce, the doctors and the professors all throughout the Arab world. I mean, it's and Israel knows it.
It's been incredible and unfathomable to see high school students celebrate their exam results. I don't know if you caught that, Chris, of them just getting their exam results after 2 years of genocide, sitting high school exams. I honestly can't comprehend. And it's the saying, the tyrants fear the poets, right? We've got another question from James Supple, Stop the War in Palestine. Let me get a mic to you. There you are.
Thanks so much for your speech tonight, your work more generally, Chris. I mean, I think you epitomise, the act of speaking truth to power. I think you've, laid out very well how, most of the mainstream media, the journalists, unfortunately, most of them who work there, like a part of the institutions of power in our society, and at least desperate to maintain a relationship with those institutions of power and with the powerful in general, and not prepared to push the boundaries. But I think more and more people are seeing through that mainstream media bias and seeing through Israel's lies, in part, as you've said, because of the scale of the genocide and what Israel is actually doing in Gaza. In that respect, I wanted to ask you a bit about what you think the role of protest movements and ordinary people in that kind of way is. I mean, we've had in Sydney, I think, the biggest protest for at least 20 years over the Harbour Bridge, and just continual waves of activism and protest around Gaza over the last 2 years, in particular. So I wanted to ask, what do you think role protest movements play in terms of, both perhaps trying to push some of the, the truth to power that you speak and the exposés that you and other journalists outside the mainstream make perhaps to a wider audience, as well as actually trying to build that strength to push back against the powerful and push the mainstream media perhaps sometimes even to cover, both the protests and what's actually going on in Gaza.
It's key. It's really important, and that's why governments have worked so hard to shut it down, because it's threatening. So they've turned universities in the United States into academic gulags. They've actually abolished free speech, which is the intent. So, that kind of pressure is vital. And I think, as someone who writes what I write, I look at those kinds of protests, and I spend a lot of time in the encampments, primarily at Princeton, because I live in Princeton, but also at Columbia, because those who are protesting, those who set up these encampments, are our nation's conscience. And I don't play this game of quote unquote objectivity. That is, I find it very cynical, especially on broadcast television or radio, where you bring in, like in the United States, you'll bring in a Republican who lies through their teeth, and then you let a Democrat lie through their teeth, and then you're balanced. You don't balance
Lies.
truth with lies. So I had heard from a reputable source that the Press Club of Australia had reached out to the Israeli ambassador to invite him to speak in the name of balance. Well, I went and looked at what the Israeli ambassador says, and it is, Israeli husband. It's all lies. And that is part of that cynicism. He's a former lieutenant colonel, by the way, in the IDF. And he could certainly tell us about Lavender, this AI program that selects Palestinians for murder. He could tell us about the quota system, where it is acceptable to kill up to 20 civilians if you're targeting a Hamas fighter, and hundreds if you are targeting a Hamas leader. He could tell us about the internal study where Israel acknowledged that 83% of the victims in Gaza are civilians. Well, and of course, that's all stuff I watch from the outside. My life has been spent on the receiving end of Israeli attacks. That would be balance. That would be matching truth with truth. That would close the circle. And this is, of course, part of my rage at the Western media, because I come out of it. All of those reporters know they're lies. We all knew they were lies. But they report them anyway because they don't want to run into the buzzsaw of the Israel lobby, and because they don't want their access cut off. But that is a betrayal, not just of my Palestinian colleagues, but it's a betrayal of the readers and the viewers. Our job, we're there, we're in a privileged position. Our job is to impart the truth. And I think that, these protests are speaking a truth that I'm trying to speak. And they're asking the power structures of their society to acknowledge this truth and act on it. And that's precisely what I'm trying to do as a writer.
And just to build on that, we have seen, there are Zionist interest groups who pull strings behind the scenes without any transparency or accountability, and media organizations hide behind and call themselves independent. Despite that, we've had ABC management hide behind meaningless words like independent, neutral, and objective. And weaponize these words against us in service of power, in service of establishment, instead of scrutinizing them. So could you speak to that a little bit more?
Well, this topic came up.
Can we have a reenactment? No.
I was so.
I'll do David. No, you do David.
I was so angry because this is exactly the kind of faux journalist I've spent my life fighting against.
Faux journalist is a really that feels very vindicating. Sorry to cut you
Very
off.
what?
Vindicating to hear. I've never heard faux journalist before.
They're stenographers to power. They're careerists. They're amoral. I mean, aside from the fact that the guy was really arrogant on top of it. So how did they neuter my stories out of Gaza? The New York Times. So I'm on the ground. I mean, I was in Gaza when F-16s bombed refugee camps. Israel described it as, this is a quote, a surgical strike on a bomb-making factory. Well, there was no bomb-making factory. The entire block was destroyed. I counted the bodies, including the children. And then what they would do to neuter the story is that every other paragraph, even though I'm interviewing eyewitnesses, would be an Israeli spokesperson. So by the end of the story, you can just believe whatever you want to believe, which is the point, in the name of balance, in the name of objectivity. And it's a mechanism to obscure the truth. That's what they hide behind. But it's really disingenuous and really dishonest and really self-serving. And as I said, it's a betrayal of these people who are suffering.
I've seen a lot of warped headlines, but my favorite by far has to be a bullet makes its way to a 3 or 4-year-old young lady. A bullet makes its way to a 3 or 4-year-old young lady, Sky News UK. So definitely my top three. We have time for one more question. Yeah? You pick. I am very indecisive when it comes to this. We've got maybe, okay, we do it outside. And we can probably end right here. I think so. Maybe comment afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Hedges. A tip you may be interested in, Emir Maimon commanded an IDF paratrooper battalion in September in Beirut in 1984. You may have better access to records than I do to continue that. I have a question for you. If there is no cost to the betrayal of Palestinian journalists, I see that there exists an opportunity to improve coverage without trying to make journalists moral people by creating a cost. How can we do that? How can we create a cost to journalists which would better motivate them to report the truth? Thank
Great
you.
question.
You have to put pressure on news organizations. So, I mean, to those of you who want to stay up that late, I'm not going to listen to it. You've got to listen to it, and then you've got to tell the ABC what they did. And there has to be, I mean, we're now in the midst of organizing a nationwide boycott of the New York Times. We have to make these news organizations pay for their complicity in, and that comes from us. So, en masse, put pressure on these media organizations that, because they, that's the game. They respond to pressure, and they dance to the tune of the Israel lobby, and because the Israel lobby has a lot of clout and a lot of money. We don't have money, of course, but we have the numbers. They don't.
So you think they're redeemable, like using internal complaints mechanisms? For example, I've had it on good authority that these complaints, I'm speaking specifics now, but really rarely go anywhere. Council is.
It depends how big the numbers are.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can organize a significant number of people to cancel their subscriptions, because all they care about is money. If we can, this campaign's not even public yet, we're just starting it, but if we can get, significant numbers of people to shut down the Times, that's the language they speak. That's the language that they're going to listen to.
Thank you. And support independent media. We've got X, we've got
that's right.
Deep Cut, we've got Declassified, all these really important organizations and institutions coming up now. And as for me, I don't read New York Times, but I do read the New York Crimes, which is actually put out by the Writers Against the War on Gaza. So, just a little bit of, diverting and putting in energy and resource into alternatives, I think, sustainable alternatives.
Those of us who've been pushed out of the mainstream, and for those of you who don't know, I lost my job because I denounced the calls to invade Iraq, and was given a formal written reprimand by the New York Times for, you can't make this up, for impugning the impartiality of the New York Times. Well, I spent a lot of time in Iraq. I knew, number one, that they didn't have any weapons of mass destruction because I covered the UN inspection teams, but number two, that they had nothing to do with 9/11. And I understood the fantasy of, that we were going to implant democracy in Baghdad, and it was going to emanate outwards across the Middle East, and Ba'athist would greet us as liberators, and the oil would pay for the reconstruction. I mean, this was magical thinking. It's not an opinion. I steeped in years in the region. Yes, it's those of us, I mean, if you're not on my Substack, chrishedges.substack.com, which has my show and has my columns, there are other people too who have essentially had to retreat. Declassified is great. I know their work, and just saw Anthony Lowenstein this morning. But you do have to support people who are still trying to do journalism. Which is, I'm frightened. I mean, it's becoming more and more anemic. We have the consolidation of media in the hands of these retrograde corporatists and billionaires. Larry Ellison, who just appointed Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss isn't just an arch Zionist. Her reporting is completely riddled with factual errors and conspiracy theories, and it's not even reputable reporting. And he's about to buy the parent company of HBO and CNN and TikTok. And you've got Murdoch, but that consolidation of press in the hands of that's really, really dangerous, because most people, unfortunately, are passive consumers of news. There probably no one in this room is, but most people are. We make sure you support Declassified and other independent media and those journalists who are trying to do it, and then lift up your voices when, I know from the New York Times when I worked there that they, letters to the editor, they may not have responded, but they had an algorithm, or they knew for each letter how many people it represented in terms of their readership.
Yeah.
So, call them out. Do you know who Kevin O'Leary is? He's a real. But he went, this is during the Occupy movement, he went after me on CBC, and it was very similar to tonight, and you can watch it on YouTube. And in the end, the CBC had to issue an apology. So, if you can pressure them, they didn't take him off the air, but they did reprimand him publicly because there was such an outcry in Canada. So you use the numbers. Don't, you're right that it probably won't make a big difference, but if we remain silent, it makes no difference.
We have one last question. Thank you, Chris. We'll just do one last one.
Hi Chris, my name is Mohammed Zaro. I am a Palestinian refugee from Khan Younis, Gaza.
Wow.
It's an absolute honor to listen to your speech in person. I've been following your career for many, many years. I'll go straight to the question now. As you mentioned, there have been more than 40 Palestinians that were martyred today in dozens of airstrikes in different parts of Gaza. And this comes a few days after the resistance, Hamas, agreed to transfer the remaining or surviving prisoners of war back to the colonizers, which is a small taste of what would happen in an unlikely scenario if, and only if, the resistance chooses to disarm. But my question to you is, if we look at this from the colonizers' political perspective, do you think Netanyahu still needs a war, a multifaceted war, including a genocide, to remain in power at this point? Or would elections be triggered in 2026? And do you think the Israeli political elite will shift further to the right or remain far right?
So Israel's already shifted into a form of Jewish fascism. We had liberal Zionism. For Palestinians, it made no difference whether they were liberal Zionists or Smotrich. But that strain of Jewish fascism was always there, starting with Jabotinsky, who Benito Mussolini called, and I'm quoting, a good fascist. And he modeled his movement on primarily Italian fascism with bands of thugs. And then you had Meir Kahane and the Koch Party, and the liberal Zionists actually outlawed Koch in 1994. None of this made any difference for the Palestinians. It was how they presented themselves to the world. That has now changed. So the heirs of Meir Kahane, the heirs of Jabotinsky are in power. So yes, Netanyahu is in trouble politically because half the country doesn't want him there, but that will make no difference in terms of the genocide. We know from the polling and also the blood-curdling nature of the Hebrew press and the utter lack of introspection and self-criticism and self-awareness, that even if Netanyahu goes, it's not going to stop the genocide. What we're dealing with is the visage, the face. So instead of the cultured Abba Eban, Oxford educated, we're getting the raw face of the colonists. I mean, it used to be that the colonists could not serve in the higher echelons of the Mossad or in the army. That's all changed. So Israel is shifting in that sense politically, which is certainly, in a way, it's more honest, and it's certainly hurting Israel in terms of its international status. But we'd be fooling ourselves to think even if Bibi disappears, it's going to make any difference. I mean, the Israelis have, the poll numbers are in 80+%. They have signed on for this mass slaughter. And you just can see it on their own social media where they make fun of Palestinians repeatedly. So even all of these people who want the hostages back, that doesn't mean they want the genocide to stop.
Chris, I can't thank you enough for tonight. I want to thank you for your reporting, continued reporting, your analysis, your integrity through all of this. It's an honor to share the stage with you. Thank you again for being here tonight. And